gone live. Here I am. Oh, I'm the wrong way around. I forgot to change it, and it's not too late to do it now. I can try. So watch here. You have to press a button, then you have to press another button, which looks like a bunch of spanners, and then you flip it, and then you go back, and then you step back. Sorry for the delay, but now you can read my shirt. That's excellent. Malware I can't even read it myself. You can read it for me. Excellent. I'm back in Port Meadow in Oxford, which is where I first went when we first started doing the socially distanced outdoor Facebook Live videos. It looks like a gorgeous day, but you can see how I'm dressed. It was freezing earlier and the winds got up, so I hope you can hear me fine. So let's crack straight on, folks. You can see from the headline, today's video is all about passwords and what to do if they get breached. In other words, when should you change them? Now, you may wonder why today, here comes the wind, why today is this suddenly a topic? The reason is we wrote yesterday on Naked Security about a survey that came out with some research that was done over password changing efforts of people over a 2-year period, 2017 and 2018. This research came out from Carnegie Mellon University at a conference recently, and it showed that in their admittedly small sample size, even after they'd been notified by a company that said, look, we've had a data breach, you probably ought to change your password, only a third of people did. And as far as they could tell, a significant number of those people actually ended up picking a password that was in some ways weaker than the one they had before. In other words, maybe they'd fallen into bad habits, even though they knew they were changing their password because their old one got breached. And that raises the question, well, can you just ignore data breaches? Does it matter? Do you need to change your password every single time, particularly if you started with a strong password? Let me just get rid of that off the screen. Excellent. Now, the answer is, if you receive a data breach notification, it will typically include some information about what happened to your password or what happened to your data and what data was exposed. Unfortunately, not all data breach notifications include this information, but generally you can think of data breaches as happening in one of 3 main ways, or in 3 main sorts. So there's a sort where a company will admit, hey, we gave some of your data to a third party for marketing purposes and they lost it. Maybe they lost a laptop, they had a USB key stolen or something like that, or somebody just ran off with the data because they thought they could make some money out of it. Now that does happen, but usually when that happens, the company is able, although it's very embarrassing for them and it's not good for you, they're usually able to be pretty definitive about what the crooks or what got lost, because they would know what was in the database they handed to this third party, where it's a third party breach, but the company who owned the data is still responsible. And so that might include, for example, for marketing, it might be your full name, your email address, your home address, and your telephone number. Now, it's not great to lose that, but it does mean that your password or some representation of your password was never in that data. So if that should happen, you have some trouble. Like, what do? Do you want to get a new phone number? That's probably too complicated. You want to be on the lookout for fraudulent emails and people trying to misuse that information for sure, but you probably don't need to change your password. Another sort of breach, there may be an admission that, well, credit card numbers were stolen or something financial that seems to come either from the innards of a computer system that you were connected to, or maybe a third-party system where control was handed off, for example, for a payment. And usually in that case, the company will be able to give you an idea of what was stolen. But very frequently, the crooks don't get that far in. They don't get far in enough to, say, get at your credit card transactions, but they do get at the edge of the network far enough to get what's called the authentication database, or maybe some other stuff as well. So, if in a data breach notification there is any suggestion that what the crooks have got is something that in some way represents your password, then clearly somebody who shouldn't have that information and might be able to figure out your password from it may be able to recover it, and you absolutely do need to change your password. Just stepping in to look at some comments. Teresa, hello from sunny Ottawa, excellent. Ian from Wales watching, not whale watching, that's a completely different thing. How do you get two whales in a mini? That's an old joke. You cross the Severn Bridge. That's a very, very old joke, so disregard that. So basically, let's look at the kind of ways that your passwords can get exposed if there's a breach in which you receive the information that authentication or login related data was stolen. Now, in the worst case, a website can match your password when you type it in next time by saving the password you chose in plain text, and nobody should be doing that. And in fact, if there's any suggestion in a data breach notification that that was how your password was stored, then I would strongly recommend not that you change your password, but you consider taking your business or your account somewhere else. Because clearly that company is many years off the pace when it comes to security, because it means they're not taking even simple precautions that prevent things like authentication database breaches causing an instant password compromise. The next way is you don't store the password, you store what's called a cryptographic hash of the password, where you put the password into a scrambling algorithm, and then next time when you log in, if you provide your password and it hashes to the same thing the second time, it means you've chosen you've used the same password again. The site can verify you know the password, but they never have to record or store what the password actually was. Now that's a lot better, because it means if the crooks make off with the database, they have to crack your password, because they can't go backwards from the hash to the password. They have to try password after password after password. That, by the way, is one reason why it's important to choose a strong and complicated password, because it means if the crooks do get a database of password hashes, then you're going to be very low down on the list of getting cracked, because your password is going to be tried after days or weeks or even months, whereas the poor person who chose password or change me or secret or 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 is going to get cracked literally in the first 10 goes, because the crooks don't try passwords from AAAA to ZZZZ. They try the most obvious ones first, and then they try the more and more difficult ones as you go along. So in that case, you need to change your password before the crooks crack the password from the hashes that they've stolen. So the sooner you do it, the better. And in some cases, you will find that companies, all they do is hash the password and store the hash. Now that's good, but in these days it's not really good enough. And the reason for that is that if they take everyone's password and just do one scrambling of a hash algorithm, unfortunately on modern computers, if the crooks get the database, if it's just one loop of a hash algorithm to try your password, they can try tens, hundreds, or even thousands of millions of passwords a second. And the other problem is that all the company is doing is taking your password and hashing it, and the same with everyone else's. The problem is that if they crack one password and it just so happens that password is the same as yours, then you will have the same hash as the other person, and that means that the passwords tend not to fall one at a time, they fall in batches. It also means that if the crooks know a password that is associated with your account, even if it has a different name somewhere else, and they actually know that password, by hashing the password, they can see if your password appears in somebody else's database. And if you chose a good password, the chance that a random looking password from here matches a hash in that database, that's also bad, because it means even if you have different usernames between the two accounts, the crooks can put 2 and 2 together and say, you know what, that account with that password probably matches this one here, because the weird looking password lines up. So the better way for companies to do it, and if you hear them talk about salting and hashing, or things like bcrypt, scrypt, or pbkdf2, I'll repeat that, it's pbkdf2, it's password-based key derivation function version 2. And the idea of those is they don't just take your password and hash it. They take your password, they add a random number that's unique to you, then they hash that, and then they hash it over and over and over again. Now that first bit is called salt. It gives a bit of flavor to the password, and it means that if 2 people choose the same password, they'll end up with different hashes. So that means the crooks have to crack every single password individually. They can't get lucky. It also means that the hash of your password in this database will never match one in another database, because the salts chosen randomly are going to be different. And then the other thing you'll hear that they do is called stretching, and that's where you take the salt, you take the password, you hash it, and then you do it over and over and over again, typically 10,000 or 100,000 times, for example. Now that makes logging in slow. It means you might have to wait 1/10 of a second before you can log in. That is a cost that is easy to amortize over everybody's login, and very easy for you to handle, but it means it takes 100,000 times longer for the crooks to try each password while they're cracking. So the answer is, how quickly do you need to change your password? It does depend on how the site was storing your password. As I said, if it was in plain text, that's such a bad idea. You should probably get out of that site as soon as you can, because they kind of don't get security yet. If it's hashed in a way that's easy to crack, then you need to be faster than if it's hashed in a way that's more complicated to crack. But the important thing is, if you have had a breach notification, if there is any suggestion that you ought to change your password, don't be like 2/3 of the people in that Carnegie Mellon University survey who figured, you know what, I'll get round to it later. So I want to give you 4 pieces of advice on when you get a breach notification and your password seems to be affected, or you suspect it might be, what are the things you should bear in mind about changing it? So I'll consult my notes to make sure I get all the 4 things in there. Unfortunately, they're not 4 do's, they're 4 don'ts. So the first one is, don't delay. Do it today, because even if you've got a super strong password and it's going to take the crooks a month, 6 months, a year to crack it, if you get to change it before they figure out what your old password was, you've won. Too late for them. They've basically got a useless password because it's no longer in existence. So the quicker you change, the better. The second point is, please don't take shortcuts with your passwords to avoid using a password manager. A longish comment here from Trees. Oh, thanks for these reminders about passwords and those nitty-gritty, salty technical details delivered from a windy meadow. Yeah, I guess that means it's hard to hear. I'll finish up quickly because of the wind. So the second point is, don't take shortcuts, and I don't mean don't choose short passwords. I mean, don't do what a lot of people still do, even though they know they shouldn't, which is get a complicated password and then add -FB for Facebook, -TW for Twitter, -YT for YouTube, and so on and so on. And they kind of think, well, the password's complicated enough, the hashes will all be different, the crooks won't realize they're the same. The problem is, if they figure out one of them, if a crook sees a Facebook password and realizes there's something in there that looks random and something that looks specific to Facebook, it's pretty easy for them to guess what your others are. So use a password manager and let it pick a fully random password every time. Don't try and go super clever password with dead giveaway at the end, because that could be as bad as having the same password on every site if the crooks can get it. The third thing, and this is a warning that came from the word that I'm choosing this word from the Carnegie Mellon paper, don't assume that your password's invincible. The researchers were able to infer from what they'd done that some of the users, I guess they spoke to some of them, they kind of figured, look, my password's so complicated that I just don't think the crooks are going to get it. Even if they have to do any cracking, they're never going to get there. Now, be careful of thinking like that, because it means that there are 2 problems with it. One is you think, well, I've got such a complicated password, maybe it doesn't matter if I use it on several sites. The problem is, if you do that, you could still get phished. So you could have a complicated password, but if the crooks find it out not through cracking it from a data breach, but by learning it via malware on your computer, or because someone shoulder surfed it and actually sold it to them, then the complexity of your password is no hindrance to the crooks if they know what the complexity is already. So don't assume that your password is invincible. If you have a data breach notification, no matter how good you think your current password is, if you have a password manager, picking an equally good subsequent password is really easy and shouldn't take you too long. And the last point, folks, because we did have some comments on naked security where people were saying, hey, surely this is okay. I've got 2FA, so I don't need to worry about my password anymore. Isn't 2FA a replacement for my password? Well, no, because that's why it's called 2-step verification or 2-factor authentication, because it's the second of 2. If you're going to pick a weak password, then really what you have is 1FA, because you have to assume that if your password's weak enough for the crooks to get anyway, then it's kind of an irrelevancy. So even if you adopt 2-factor authentication, make it so that it's putting you in a stronger position. It's not an excuse to say, well, that means I can drop my game here and 2FA will bring me back to where I was. Start here with a good strong password and add 2FA to make it even harder for the crooks. So thanks very much for watching, folks. I've got one more comment to look at, which is from Randy. Password entropy. Yeah, that an interesting 2 words just to explain. Entropy is a jargon word. Well, it's a physics term. It kind of describes the higher the entropy, the greater the disorder. So as the universe winds down in 7,000 billion years' time, or however long it is, it will be said that its entropy, the order in the universe, will be increasing. And the idea of password entropy, it's a use of that word to mean the more mixed up it is, the less likely it is that it's going to come out early in an algorithm where the crooks are guessing. And the best way to get a password with good entropy or good disorder is not to make it up yourself, because even if you bash away on a keyboard, you tend to type the same keys, don't you? You'll often see passwords in breach lists where all the letters come from the same row of the keyboard, and you know that someone was banging away thinking, I'm being super random, but they had sort of ASD, 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 F, which is not very random at all. So the best way to get your good password entropy, use a password manager, and it will use a pseudo-random number generator that can get stuff as complicated as you like, because it doesn't have an intellect that will get deluded or distracted by the fact that it has to pick a verse from Shakespeare or it has to pick a word from the dictionary. Okay, thanks again. Grass needs some rain, but not whilst you're there. And, Karen again, thank you. Stay safe, stay healthy, and same to you, Karen. Yes, it is a bit dry. It's kind of been very droughty. It did rain earlier today, but so little that the ground just sucked it in. So, folks, let me finish up now. Let you all go and not listen to my breathy voice anymore. Basically, the deal is if you get a breach notification, there's any implication in there that it would be wise to change your password, don't delay, do it right away, because if you beat the crooks to it, then in fact their breach of the password is kind of worth nothing to them. So thanks for listening, folks, and until next time, stay secure.